Yeah, you're welcome to come on stage, get used to the view. Oh,
So
can
does
I
it
encourage you who are staying in the session to come and fill the front seats? It's much nicer for the speakers if they can actually see you. It's a long way up at the back. Thank you. How you doing? Good. So ready to go forward? Sorry, ready to go now. Sweet. Okay. Just take in the view, get used to it a little bit.
That shows up there, but not there.
Yeah, no, nothing comes up here.
Okay.
Oh, that I've noticed. But it comes up there.
Sweet.
Okay.
My notes.
Just these mics or the hand mic if you prefer?
Well, you could probably use a hand mic if you want, but otherwise these ones. You happy with these ones?
Yeah, I'm happy with it.
Alright, cool. You guys are upset.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sweet, thank you.
Cool. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll crack on to try and do our best to keep to time. So, first up, we have enabling nature-based approaches to stormwater management and Fishpassage. We have Jason Smith from Morphum Environmental. Jason has a broad background with considerable experience working with legislation, plans, policies at all levels, as well as considerable regulatory experience in consent applications and compliance monitoring. And next to Jason is Theo Dombroski. He's also from Morphum. Theo is an environmental engineer passionate about the ocean. Theo's work experience in large-scale projects from preliminary design to completed construction and liaison with clients, contractors and other professional consultants. Together, Theo and Jason have worked on numerous projects where a design solution is required for a stormwater management issue whilst meeting environmental outcomes, such as the requirement to maintain or improve fish passage through a catchment. Morphum seek to utilise nature-based approaches where possible to achieve the same. Welcome, Jason and Theo.
Kia ora hana. Mauri ora e te whānau. Ko Theo Dombroski, tōku inga. Ko Jason Smith, tēnei. Ke Morphum Environmental I mahi ana. He Mataro Taiao, environmental engineer, and he Kaipu Taiao, our tūroa, principal environmental scientist. So one of the key objectives at Morphum is co-creating thriving ecosystems. So today, me and Jason are going to have a go at co-presenting from both an engineering and ecology perspective. And so our presentation is on enabling nature-based approaches to stormwater management and fish passage to make sure we get the best outcomes for our streams.
Kia ora. Thank you, Theo. It will come as no surprise to the people in this room that our freshwater systems, our streams and our wetlands are under considerable pressure. We deal with it every day in our professional lives, and increasingly we're seeing it at home when we turn on the news at 6. For us at Morphum, we'd love to be out of a job, but for as long as there is that pressure and the need for us to interact with our freshwater systems, I think we're going to be in work. But we can do better. It's no longer enough for an in-stream structure like a bridge and a culvert just to meet its needs for us as humans. A structure in a stream needs to do as much for that stream as possible. And whether you term it a nature-based solution, blue-green infrastructure, we need to move on from just those engineering outcomes and focus on our wider social goals as well as what that structure can do for the stream. Now, one of the ways our streams and our wetlands are under pressure shows up in our freshwater fauna. And when I mentioned that New Zealand has native freshwater fish, most people question me, and it's a new thing for them to come across. But of course, most people term it whitebait. But our freshwater fish are in decline. Our freshwater fish have a high degree of endemnicism, meaning that they're only found here in New Zealand, and they also are what we call dihydromatous, meaning they need to spend part of their time out at sea in order to complete their life cycle. This makes fish passage through a catchment both upstream and downstream critically important to continued fish populations. And I have up here on slide some statistics around just how bad our freshwater fish are suffering, and unfortunately they're already out of date. There's news out of last week and the numbers are trending in the wrong direction. However, this has been recognised in the regulatory framework, and back in 2020 we had a new tool in the toolkit to start addressing these concerns called the NESFW, or the National Environmental Standards for Fresh Water. Now this was a major step forward. I can't stress that enough. It was the first time in many places that we got codified sets of rules, regulations and conditions around what some of these in-stream structures need to look like in order to facilitate fish passage, and it was probably the first time many people heard the term fish passage. And this is a change that's being picked up and reflected in the stormwater industry, to which Theo is going to speak to further.
Yeah, so stormwater is changing. We're moving away from these conveyanced approach of getting water out of a catchment as fast as possible, as it's starting to damage our streams and receiving environments like the coast. We are moving more towards these catchment-based approaches and process-based design, and these nature-based solutions in streams that mimic the natural processes of streams. So these can help provide resilience, and because they can move with the dynamic nature of streams, and they act as multifunctional infrastructure where they are great from a geomorphic perspective, a stormwater management perspective, ecological habitat and ecological connectivity perspective, talking about fish passage, and also aligns with the theme of the conference, water is a taonga, and restoring the mauri of our streams. Oh, sorry, still me. One example of these nature-based solutions in streams is the humble rock riffle, or one of these timber crossvein weirs. So the key component of riffle is a line of boulders that are in a V shape in the stream, which creates a constriction and attenuation, which then creates this bathtub upstream of a riffle, which creates these low flow velocity zones in these rainfall events we're designing around, and reduces erosion. But they can also be designed from an ecological perspective and fish passage perspective to raise the water permanently to remediate these vertical barriers such as perched culverts.
Okay, cool. And so now the link. Unfortunately, many of our nature-based solutions are being interpreted within the confines of the NESFW, which means many of those structures that you've just seen are being interpreted as weirs and are having those rules and regulations for a weir applied to them. And this creates a disconnect where we have these design outcomes set at a national scale, which don't quite reflect the MBS design approach, which is inherently more place-based, thinking about the reach scale and what is happening in that stream, focusing on those processes at that more local scale. And this does have implications. A compliant design is not necessarily the most ecologically effective or necessarily the most ecologically appropriate for a catchment or for your aquatic community. And the most effective solution can be non-compliant, pushing you towards a consenting pathways. And Theo is going to talk us through that now in terms of the weir and the rock riffle.
Yeah, this is a summary table of the activity conditions for permanent activity of a weir under the NES freshwater. And these prescriptive attributes are currently not enabling nature-based solutions to achieve the best outcomes they can. And the second column there is just some suggestions for improvements. So one thing I want to talk to is slope, grade. At the moment, to get a permitted activity of a rock riffle, it needs to have a slope of no greater than 1 to 30. So let's just have a think of an example. Say we've got a perched culvert and we need to backwater it so we can get the fish to swim through it, and we need a crest height of 0.5 metre. So if you've got a flat stream, that's 15-metre rock structure right there. If you've got a steep structure, that means 20, 30 metres long. So of course this has got high earthworks volumes, high rock volumes, which in turn creates high carbon, high cost, and a huge ecological disturbance to the streams. Imagine if this is happening in a SEA. It also doesn't allow. It assumes that it's a linear structure, 30 metres long, 15 metres long. But we can also include resting pools and a curved or zigzagging flow path through these riffles, which can shorten that footprint. We would suggest that the rule should be matching the gradient of the stream. If there's already a steep stream and that the fish are already getting up, then they can navigate this riffle as well. And the next one I will talk to is rock size. So at the moment there's a prescriptive of rocks has to be 150 to 250 mils in diameter. So is this taking into account confined urban streams or wide rural rivers? The rock size needs to be determined based on the hydraulic conditions of the stream, the flows and the velocities. So we need to have a wide range that fits those criteria, and we need to have a wide grading to create these interlocking structures that can be robust and also avoid water permeating below the surface and keeping that water on the surface so we're not creating a bigger fish passage barrier in the process.
Cool. So this slide is just a summary of what we had before, where there is that disconnect between an effective design and those prescriptive outcomes versus a compliant design which can miss the nuance and what is actually happening within that stream and what needs to be considered within that specific context. Theo, in terms of your work, how does this matter?
Yeah, why this matters. So typically when you think of a permitted activity, you're thinking this is going to be faster, I don't have to go get a consent that can take a long time. This is going to be cheaper, I don't have to prepare all the supporting documents for a consent. And you think it's going to be lower risk because you're not going to have the obligations of these unknown consent conditions that could be put on you. And you're just going to assume that it's going to have the best ecological outcome because it's permitted. However, what's happening with nature-based solutions is you're ending up with these bigger impacts on ecological bed disturbance, these higher costs from materials, and it's creating this paradox with the very rules that were made to enhance these environmental outcomes are actually starting to deter designers from actually getting the best outcomes from these nature-based solutions.
Cool. And so the solutions, note the S and note the question mark. Don't pretend to be the font of all knowledge and have the exact silver bullet, but we do have for you today 4 discussion points that we think are worth considering as this conversation advances. The first one is a shift to the nature-based process framework. Rather than focusing on the outcome, the weir must have a rock size of a certain diameter, how do we determine this? We know those sorts of approaches. Engineers will use the same methodologies, but we can manage for those processes rather than the outcomes, which will be there at the more local scale. We can look to the hydraulics, the ecological function, the geomorphic capability of that structure with the stream, which includes sediment transport through the system, which is part of a natural system. We also need to consider is what natural fauna is found in that stream. As Theo was mentioning before, if you have a waterfall immediately below your culvert, there's little point in providing passage for fishes that cannot naturally surmount that obstacle. Theo, do you want to talk us through an applied example?
Yeah, when you hear the term nature-based solution, you may think, hippies. And they're just randomly placing rock within a stream based on the vibe. But there's actually a lot of technical processes and assessment that goes behind it. Here's a little snippet from a heat crash model in a stream in Auckland. You can see there's a whole bunch of red in there, which is showing the shear stresses in a stream, which are the forces which are parallel to the stream flow. And when you combine this information with the shear strength values from these geological material that's found in these stream beds and stream banks, you can identify how much erosion is going to happen, where it's going to happen, and where the sediment may be mobilized and then enter into our receiving environments. The same goes for velocity as a key indicator from the hydraulics perspective. In this slide here, we've got a whole section of red, which is representing over 4 meters per second of stream flow, stream velocities. But when we put in some rock riffles in this slide here, which are the purple lines, you'll see now there's a little bathtub of low flow velocity upstream of each of these riffles, which are now less than 1 meters per second. And you'll see that there are still little red spots on there, but these are where the riffles are and the rock armouring is, which prevents streambed incision in these areas, and we're we're creating these low flow areas where they need to be in these critical points within the stream.
Cool. Now our second point is recognition for MBS solutions. It may come as a surprise to many of you that WERE was not previously defined in the RMA, nor in many regional plans. And I think that's because we know what a WERE is. We understand them as these sorts of structures, devices we put into streams for water abstraction, water takes, or for flow gauging. And I hope from our presentation today you have taken away that what we are designing for now in the nature-based approaches is fundamentally a different kind of structure, and perhaps it's time that it had its own regulatory framework around that. Now the third point we have here is what we've called pragmatic or global consents, which speaks to one of my areas of professional interest, early engagement with regulatory. Regulatory services probably do not want to be processing a single consent for every structure in a stream or every MBS style solutions that may require one. Under a global consenting framework, you can engage with regulatory to establish a program of works and a framework, how these structures are going to be designed, how effects are going to be managed, and deliver project by project under that program of work. Yes, there may need to be levels of detail depending on the risks or the effects identified, but it will help with that consenting process and help get us unstuck when we do have to go through that consenting process, structure by structure. And Theo's also going to speak now on our final points.
Yeah, so in my previous career as a structure engineer, I got to work with the New Zealand Building Code a lot more than I do now as an environmental engineer, but we use these things called acceptable solutions. And what acceptable solutions are, they're defined by central regulatory, and they set out a process to be followed, which is evidence of compliance. So the Building Consent Authority has to accept it because it's a pre-approved design methodology. It can create it can also be used to create these design envelopes or swim lanes within a level of acceptable risk, which work really well with nature-based solutions with these dynamic systems and changing sites and different widths of streams and things. And we think they could work quite well, and they could help alleviate consenting burdens and the costs associated with that, and allow for these widespread rollouts of Fishpassage projects, which could all be under one consent with all in these design envelopes. And the example of the rock riffle, we could have these standardized drawings that accompany them, and they have to follow those attributes that we discussed in that table earlier in the design envelope, and then also be accompanied by some standard construction specifications that are easily followed by a streamworks contractor. Yeah.
Thank you. So we see ourselves as being at an inflection point. The NESFW has gotten us so far and it's taken us massive stride forwards, but it's time for us to take it one step further. The intent has been positive, but at times the implementation is constraining our solutions. We think the shift needed is a change in focus from what structures should look like to how they should function and interact in their local context. We believe that if we get this right, we have the opportunity to not only improve fish passage, achieve better stormwater outcomes, but we can also do it for a lower cost and at a scalable delivery. Thank you very much. It's been us.
That one sounds promising. Excellent, cool. Thank you very much for that presentation. Have I got any questions from the room? Yes, we've got a taker. Please remember to say your name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Eugene Bojanski. I work with a consulting firm, BBO. I'm also one of the authors of the Fishpassage Guidelines. I've got two things. One, in support of something you said. This pursuit of the permitted activity, it's a bit of a fallacy because everybody forgets. You're doing disturbance in a stream bed. You're working in a higher erosion risk environment. You need a consent anyway. Why are you bothering trying to get just one little portion of your project out of the consent? You might as well do the work right. Second, you guys need to take a look in Chapter 4 of the Fishpassage Guidelines and look at that table that shows velocity versus duration. You'll find that you can work around in there. You can use that table to set up various structures that will give you fish passage far more reliably. There's some methods in there that'll really help. Avoid over standardization because every stream is different. That's about it.
Yeah, kia ora. I think we're talking to some of the same points there. We certainly recognise the work that you've done in the Fishpassage Guidelines, and there's a wealth of information there. And one of the things that stuck out for me was that idea of the stream simulation approach, which is fantastic. We do see this though still, where people and projects become bogged down and hooked up on the no, that's the consent, no, that's time, that's cost, and that's really what we were speaking to, is trying to enable more of these solutions rather than coming up and feeling your frustration there.
Yeah, I suppose it's also more targeted at, rather than when it is just a small part of a project, it's for when you're rolling out these big projects that are all specifically fish passage, and we're trying to get a whole lot of positive environments for our ecology and streams. But we need to go through an individual consent for each remediation to each in all these different subcatchments and streams. But yes, the Fishpassage Guidelines are great, and they could even be part of, some of these things could be part of these acceptable solutions, but we need to combine them from a geomorphology perspective and a hydrology perspective as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Well done on probably answering the hardest question in the conference. Any other questions or perspectives? Lovely. In that case, we'll let you be. Thank you very much. Round of applause. Thank you. it's just gone 3 o'clock, so I'll get started with the introductions. Next up is AT's Hīkina Te Wero Environmental Action Plan, Managing Our Discharges in a Growing Urban Environment. And our speakers today, we've got Abby Sharma from Auckland Transport. Abby is a subject matter expert who leads and advances nature-based resilience and biodiversity initiatives at Auckland Transport, contributing significantly to the objectives embedded in AT's Hīkina Te Wero Environmental Action Plan and AT's Sustainability Strategy. And we also have Jason McGregor from Transvalue Consultants. Jason is a highly experienced civil engineer and project leader with over 35 years' experience delivering complex infrastructure projects across local government and consultancy environments. Jason has worked on a broad range of civil infrastructure projects spanning stormwater, transport and land development. Welcome.
Tēnā katoa, ko Abby Sharma tōku ingoa, ko maunga ko himale te maunga, ko ganga te awa. Kia ora. I'm Abby Sharma. I'm the AT's Principal Environment and Nature-Based Resilience Specialist within the Science and Sustainability team. And I'll also let Jason introduce himself now before we get into the talk.
Hi, I'm Jason McGregor. I'm a consultant engineer. I've been working on this project with Auckland Transport since it started, and it's a few years ago now, 2021, and I've continued that journey right up until now.
Thanks, Jason. And we both are here to talk to you and do a knowledge sharing on our Managing Our Discharges work program. We all know Auckland is growing fast. That means more people, more housing, more economic growth, and that means more roading infrastructure to support more transport demand. And as the roading network expands year after year, the result is pretty direct. More runoff, more contaminants, and more pressure on the environments our communities value. But here's the crux of it. A lot of the roading network we rely on every day is legacy. Historically, stormwater from many of these existing roads has been treated as lawfully established and permitted, which in practice has meant limited treatment unless a major upgrade triggers it, which is redevelopment or development of impervious surfaces. So the system keeps functioning, but untreated runoff keeps reaching the environment and the effects add up. The direction of travel and policy is clear. Regulatory environment has evolved. It explicitly calls for contaminants from high-generating areas, such as high-use roads, to be managed, not just to avoid new impacts, but to progressively reduce existing ones. And we also, for complementing this, have the Auckland region-wide NDC that establishes objectives and requirements for managing road runoff, although in roading context, these are primarily triggered for new or redevelopment of high-use roads. As such, a gap remains in the treatment of stormwater runoff from the untouched existing high-traffic road network, a gap that AT has sought to address through its strategic planning initiatives. AT developed Hīkina Te Wero Environmental Action Plan as a 10-year framework. Not a nice-to-have document, but something designed to integrate into how we deliver, operate, and maintain the transport roading network. It sets 5 priority environmental targets and builds a monitoring and reporting approach so progress is visible, measurable, and not just aspirational. One of those targets is managing our discharges. Managing our discharges makes a very specific commitment. Treat stormwater from 30% of the busiest roads by 2030. And we have defined busiest with a high threshold of 25,000 vehicles per day or more. It is worth pausing on the prioritization logic. The Auckland Unity Plan definition of high-use road is much lower, 5,000 vehicles per day, and you can see that on the left-hand side of the slide. But for our Managing Discharge work program, we intentionally set the bar higher. The point is focus. Target the corridors where treatment can make the biggest difference. It's a strategy of impact, not trying to do everything everywhere, but doing the most meaningful treatment intervention work first.
Okay, this is where I've come into this project to take that big blob of blue dots and turn it into an actual work program. So that ended up being several hundred, 246 busy roads by the time it was narrowed down. Luckily, Auckland Transport has a very good GIS traffic count portal that enabled all this information to be utilised and sorted into some very long lists and lots of spreadsheets from on my end. And then that ended up being down to a lesser number, obviously, of actual roads, so 82 actual roads, and then applying the 30% target to that, we ended up with 25 roads to treat, which doesn't sound like very many, and it seems like a very simple work program, but then it was a case of looking at those roads and figuring out which ones are actually going to be worth taking forward to do something with. And just as the slides got in there, there was priority given to roads intersect with streams ahead of just the general list of roads. The graphic that's on the screen now it's more of a recent version of a spreadsheet that I produced and you can see the ones that are the paler colours are all crossed out. These are roads that have been going through it, looking at maps, various data that was available, and working out that those roads are not going to be suitable for retrofitting a treatment device to. So as much as there's 25 roads to treat, is actually some of the challenges been coming up with 25 roads that actually are going to be suitable for retrofitting a stormwater device into. So yeah, there's been a continuous process of refining that list, revisiting it, and we're still doing it again now of just trying to iron out some of the roads that have problems. So once we had that list of the roads, then it was a case of going out and finding out what everyone else is doing in the council family and others, and that involved a lot of meetings and meetings and meetings, a lot of conversations, which was good, but then the challenge with all that was trying to find out what people are doing, when they're doing it, and trying to get the stars to align so that we could progress our piece of work and ideally fit it in with other people's work to avoid digging twice or disrupting other users. Some of this involved also checking with Auckland Transport has a big capital works program, and it was going through lots of project managers finding out what projects they were doing and where. It was mixed results with that. A lot of times the timing just didn't work. We weren't going to wait on them. They hadn't waited on us, say, and they'd already progressed. Budgets just didn't align as well. We also have a standing meeting with Auckland Council Healthy Waters where we discuss their program of work for contaminant reduction work. But they tend to look at larger catchment scale programs of work, whereas we are looking specifically at roads, or sections of road only. So yeah, the overlap in those didn't always work. So, and the graphic up there at the moment is just trying to show, the managing of discharges in the middle there, and there's lots of other work streams, organisations that all feed into it. So trying to tap into all that has been a bit of fun and games. And once we've sort of talked to them, figured out what they were doing and where it hopefully aligned, we backed up the list of roads to treat with a business case to get some money to make some of these things happen. And that occurred early in the process, and we've also been through and revisited that recently to update it. we've just kept things, collaboration, discussions going, updating, refining, and just making sure that this can still continue as we had originally envisaged it. Back to Abby.
So the reality check. As mentioned earlier, these are existing roads, space is tight, and many corridors, like the photo image on the slide, are full of underground, above-ground services and infrastructure. That means the ideal GDO1 solution isn't always feasible, especially for green infrastructures like rain gardens or swales. So in these situations, more often in restricted brownfield catchments, we need structural solutions such as non-cartridge GPTs that can fit the constraints while still delivering treatment outcomes. It's not just design, it's operations as well. If a device sits beside live lanes on a busy road, maintenance can require significant temporary traffic management, which drives costs and disruptions. Sediment loads vary, so maintenance planning matters for AT. And there's also a practical complexity. Road catchments don't always neatly align with road stormwater catchments. So we must adjust scopes to suit the real networks and catchments, supported by desktop reviews, site visits, and sometimes CCTV investigations and site surveys. As you know, with legacy, there will be as-built information gaps. Other complexity, as Jason has alluded to, is about prioritization and working in collaboration with other council families. I will now pass it back to Jason to take you through a few projects to explain the implementation reality and key challenges that we have faced through 3 of our case studies. Back to you, Jason.
Thanks. So this is Green Lane East. This was basically the first device that we got in the ground in the work program. There was 2 sites were given to consultants to design this, and they were both put forward to go to construction. Due to the timing of those works, the end of financial year was looming and the money needed to be spent, and we'd lose it. There was a part of AT was tasked with delivering taking these sites to construction, and between us we figured out that an existing physical works contract, a longer term one, would be used to deliver the actual device. In the image on there, the device is located in that green catchment you'll see on screen, so it's not a very big catchment. But for those of you maybe familiar with Auckland, that's Green Lane Interchange, that circle on the motorway off to the side. So it's a very big, busy road adjacent to the motorway, which presented some challenges. At one point, the delivery of this piece of work was going to be stopped because the traffic management costs exceeded a particular threshold at the time, but we managed to work our way around that. There's also basalt there, so trying to work in that basalt was going to be a factor. They ended up doing the work at night time, and conveniently there was another project, construction project right next door, which already had traffic management out, so we managed to work in with them quite nicely. I think that the lesson learnt from this one was that particular construction contract, we probably paid a bit more than we'd like due to the way that contract was set up. So it is, from there it was trying to make sure we allowed enough time and found the right delivery model that better suited the type of work that we were trying to do. This next one is Glenfield Road, and I've called it False Start because it got into investigation and part of a design before the challenges on the site meant we really had to pull it. So it's a busy road, 29,000 vehicles a day, and just once the consultant got into it, we realised that there's too many constraints in terms of the catchment makeup, and it would have meant lots of devices in the road or a downstream device which then ends up becoming a healthy waters asset. There's particular divisions around who owns what assets in Auckland. So it was decided to just not progress that one any further. And again, the lesson learned from that one was to do some more upfront work to make sure that some of these constraints were identified sooner. On to the third one that we've got an example is Great South Road. Some of you may have come to the talk earlier about the Puanui project that's been done in that same area. So that's in the image on screen. If you on the right-hand side, the narrow part is where AUDO have just completed a piece of work, and they are also got a further stage downstream of Great South Road. So where the yellow lines are is the piece of road that we're looking at. So the design for this one is going to add a couple of GPT devices in upstream, either side of a bridge across the stream, and the addition of those devices will very nicely complement the works that AUDO is doing in that Puanui stream. Yeah, and that's those. Just a snapshot of the sites. There's a few others that are in progress, being designed. Now Abby is going to continue. Wrap it up.
All right. So why does it matter? Because it's not about policy and technical compliance. It's about the health of our streams and harbours and principles of Te Mana o Te Wai, recognizing water's intrinsic value and working to restore Māori. This work program, AT's Managing a Discharges work program, is a change for AT, a deliberate, evolving approach that's being refined as we go through careful consideration and collaboration with other council families so that we make tangible implementation progress for water quality improvements while balancing the realities of space, safety, and operations. So to wrap up, yes, that's not a spelling mistake, people, but my first and last attempt to summarize today's knowledge sharing in a rap. So please do go with the flow. This is my first attempt and last attempt, like I said. All right, here we go. Yeah, Auckland's growing, city moving fast. Asphalt, tires, stormwater coming in hot. Roads keep expanding, rain hits the lane. Runoff keeps rolling straight into drains. Used to say that's permitted legacy, it's fine, but the impacts stack up, yeah, year after time. So we flipped the script, said, nah, not today. We are changing how the network treats water on its way. Managing discharges, yeah, we on that track. Water quality vision, stepping up back from busiest roads to the edge of tide, 30% treated, that's how we ride. 10-year plan, 5 targets aligned. Hīkina te Wero lifting the bar every time. Not every road, no, we chose with intent. 25K, that's where the effort went. High loads, high flows, that's the play. Biggest gains first, that's the AT way. Not theory on paper, not a shelf life report. We are building solutions that the network supports. Do you feel the beat? Do you feel the shift? From design to maintenance is a mindset lift. Space is tight, yeah, constraints are real, but we make it work. Device by device, deal by deal. All roads, tide berms, services everywhere. Green where we can, but it's gotta play fair. Safety, access when the traffic's live. Maintenance matters, that's how solutions survive. Adaptive program, learning as we go. Progress over perfection, getting treatment on the flow. It's not just pipes, it's Māori, it's why. Te mana o te wai, not just words we say, it's why we show up, do the mahi each day. Managing our discharges, yeah, that's the aim. Balancing roads while protecting the same. Busy roads, big loads, keeping them in check. Auckland Transport respects the network, respects the wet. Ka pai, Māori ora.
Wowee, who's going to top that? That was awesome, well done. All right, any questions? Don't forget to say your name and affiliation.
Thank you for that. That was incredible. Really appreciate it. My name's Rianne Ingley. I'm from Auckland Council Environmental Monitoring Division. So my question is, naturally, Do you have any plans for water quality monitoring of the effectiveness of your initiatives?
So for us, when we are looking at the requirements, most of the performance-based are looking at the removal of contaminant loads, and most of these GPTs are designed to at least meet that 75% TSS removal and associated contaminant loads. So for us, the performance-based sits over there. Monitoring is actually done by council looking at that from the perspective of looking at other contaminant loads coming up from the whole catchment. Kathy is going to be speaking later today about the tire wear particles and how they're ending up in our marine environments. So that is something that's an emerging contaminant. Well, it shouldn't be an emerging contaminant, but it's a contaminant that's coming out. And so there's going to be more research that's to be done. But when it comes to performance-based, it's based on the design performances of these solutions that are being added in. So not monitoring as such, but it is based on the principle that it will remove those contaminant loads coming off the roads.
And I think I'll just add, we are in talks about the devices that are already in place, about finding out how they are performing, seeing what maintenance has occurred and what they've actually taken out of them. So that's...
Yeah, sorry, just to add as well, we have a service level agreement with Healthy Waters operations team. So we have the operations team that goes out and does all the removal of contaminants that are within these devices as well. So, yeah.
Hi, Abby and Jason, that was really great. I was just wondering, sorry, I'm Marissa from Harrison Crescent. With AT coming back into the Auckland Council family, do you see any opportunities for more kind of joined up solutions with Healthy Waters?
I think beside even coming in, we have been doing that, those collaborations and those discussions. I think Jason had already spoken about in his slides. We looking at a based land use activity, whereas other council families are looking at that regeneration of catchment planning. So given the fact that we have those busy roads in those areas, we are having those conversations where we want to put these interventions that have the best outcome. So those discussions are already happening, nevertheless, when the movement happens. So yeah.
And I think the other aspect to this is that as much as we're doing this program of work, ideally we'd like that raise the profile of these busy roads that are out there untreated. So if other people are doing works, doing projects, that they actually think about, okay, while we're there, we can add some stormwater treatment in at the same time. So that it shouldn't ideally need a work program. We can keep the work program going, but just for others to actually try and think of stormwater a bit more in their projects.
Hi, I'm Martin from Auckland Council. Just in regard to this targeting, I love the approach. Do you feel like there's scope there for even further targeting? I understand it's an easy approach to just go for your big, 25,000 plus, but do you feel like I'm thinking very heavily around industrial park areas right next to streams. You've got very specific contaminant loading happening there. Daily traffic counts of trucks. Trucks producing much different contaminant loads to your daily vehicle. So I guess, is there another targeted approach you'd look to implement in future after the scope of this program, rather than, like you say, the 5,000 vehicle per day might not be the best approach?
So specifically in industrial trade activity sites, they should be meeting their requirements under Chapter E33 of Auckland Unitary Provisions of meeting those targets of doing good housekeepings within their area, and also putting in their own source controls on their site. Irrelevant of traffic of heavy trucks going on, it's actually based on the vehicle per day count. So the number of vehicle tires that's going on. So for us, we are looking at the roads where they have those average daily traffic counts more. And based on that, ITA provisions should be meeting all those requirements of environmental management plan and good housekeeping within those catchments itself.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it briefly before, the Healthy Waters UCR program is looking at those urban areas, and some of those are targeting commercial industrial areas and looking at those catchments. So that program of work, as I see it, is already looking at those type of sites. We're trying to look at the ones that maybe aren't covered or that we can progress independently.
Hi, that was awesome, especially the wrap. Haven't seen a closer like that before. I'm Ari from WSP, and I'm just curious about your 30% metric, whether that was like a distance-based approach, or if it wasn't, how did road length and catchment area affect your decision making?
I mean, the 30% was I wasn't part of this in the target. The 30% was arrived at through the plan. So it was more just I got involved later on in applying that to the roads themselves.
Could we get a mic to Kathy to answer that question? So Kathy is right here in the front. Hannah.
On my way.
Dang, you found me. The 30% came about when we developed the target in the first place because that was all we had funding to do. And since we set that target, NZTA has withdrawn their support for water quality treatment of road runoff in the urban area. And now we are solely dependent on rate funding through the RLTP process from Council. And so that has slowed the program substantially. We would love to step it up and do a whole lot more across the region, but until there is funding available for installing treatment devices, that limits our program. We typically don't look or sort the roads by catchment size, but are focusing more on where is it actually feasible to make a difference.
Okay, any last questions? We've got time for maybe one more. I'm going to go here because you are so far up the back and I've already been up there twice.
Kia ora, Andrea from Tasman District Council, Stormwater Specialist. Great that Auckland Transport is doing some treatment of roading runoff. In our council, there's quite a bit of a disconnect between the stormwater quality team and the roading team. So how would you advise to get the roading team on board with doing some treatment?
Yeah, Kathy.
It's really tricky, and Auckland Transport has had the luxury of operating under a corporate board environment. So as a separate CCO, we are not governed by politicians. We have a corporate board, and they have director liability on their shoulders, and hence are vastly more interested in the outcomes. Sadly, that ends shortly.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone. Big round of applause for our speakers. Thanks. I believe afternoon tea is next, so go down and grab some food. Don't forget to hang out with the Expo people, and also, I'm not sure how well it's been promoted, but on the app you can vote for your favourite presentation as well. That will be awarded at tomorrow night's dinner. So, have a good day.